You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
In the winter of 1976, workers were sent to breathe life back into a crumbling seaside amusement park. Hidden inside its long-forgotten funhouse, they expected only dusty props, faded paint, and broken lights. Instead, they stumbled upon something that felt wrong from the very beginning. An unease that seemed stitched into the walls themselves. As the hours passed, strange noises stirred in the darkness. Machinery long disconnected groaned to life. Shadows shifted where no one stood, and the hollow laughter of a carnival long dead began to echo through the corridors. This is a story of fear, folklore, and the horrifying truth hidden inside the Carnival Man. If you crave immersive horror tales and spine-chilling mysteries, subscribe to Soul Studios and hit the bell icon. Your next nightmare is only one click away. Two maintenance workers stood frozen in the darkness of the funhouse, their breaths caught in their throats. In their hands was an arm, a severed human arm, its mummified skin tearing like old parchment. Moments ago, they'd been trying to take down what they thought was a Halloween prop hanging from the rafters. Now a jagged shard of bone jutted from the limb's broken stump, and a fine powder of desiccated flesh dusted the floor. It wasn't a dummy at all. It was December 1976 in Long Beach, California. The once bustling seaside amusement park known as the Pike had fallen into disrepair, its attractions shuttered and silent. A small crew was tasked with restoring the park's aging Laff in the dark, haunted house ride, prepping it for a hoped-for reopening. Among them were Dan, the grizzled foreman who'd worked the carnival circuit for decades, Miguel, a young handyman on his first big job, and Alice, a set designer with a steady nerve. Inside, the air was thick with dust, mildew, and old chemical preservatives. Each step stirred littered ticket stubs and set dangling skeletons creaking overhead. In their flashlight beams, lifeless mannequins and papier-mâché ghouls loomed in frozen poses from a bygone era. As they made their initial sweep, Miguel's flashlight fixed on one figure, high in the rafters. A dummy hung by a noose, head lolled to the side. Its skin was painted a garish fluorescent orange-red, now faded and peeling. It looked disturbingly real, down to the contorted grimace on its face. Miguel shuddered. "That one's a little too lifelike, huh?" he muttered, attempting a chuckle. Alice nodded in quiet agreement. Something about that dummy made her uneasy. Dan scoffed, shining his light up at the hanging figure. "Old carny trick," he said. "Make it as ugly and real as possible to freak out the kids." The dummy's face was dried and sunken, with glassy, uneven eyes. Most strikingly, its mouth was crudely stitched shut with fishing line, the translucent cord tangled around its jaw. Why would they sew its mouth shut? Alice wondered aloud, unsettled. Miguel grimaced. Who knows, maybe it was just a cheap repair job or a prank. They assumed it was just another prop in a ride full of hokey frights. But that assumption wouldn't last long. By nightfall, the crew had made solid progress on repairs. They replaced burnt-out bulbs, oiled the creaking mechanisms, and swept out piles of debris. Exhaustion was setting in, and the rest of the park lay silent outside, long since closed. Inside Laff in the dark, the only light came from the crew's portable work lamp, casting long shadows of the dummies on the walls. All day, that hanging figure in the noose had loomed above them. They saved it for last. Dan insisted on taking it down before locking up. "Can't leave that ugly thing up there. Might fall on someone," he said, masking a hint of unease with pragmatism. Miguel fetched a ladder, while Alice stood by with a large canvas sack to wrap the prop. Miguel climbed up unsteadily, the ladder wobbling on the uneven floor. Up close, the dummy looked even more grotesque. Its skin, if it was even rubber, had shriveled and cracked, revealing glimpses of dried greyish flesh beneath. Miguel gagged at the sweet, chemical stench. "Ah, it smells like formaldehyde," he grimaced. Hand over hand, Miguel lifted the lightweight figure by its torso. The thing was strangely stiff. He sawed through the brittle rope noose with his pocket knife. The fishing line still cinched its jaw shut, threads running taut from the chin to the back of the head. To free the dummy completely, Miguel decided to cut that too. It seemed snagged on part of the rigging. He took his knife to the crude stitches and snipped. A wet, rattling exhale of air. The effect was immediate and horrifying. A wet, rattling exhale escaped the dummy's mouth, puffing right into Miguel's face. A cloud of pale dust motes danced in his flashlight beam. The stench of formalin and decades-old decay flooded his senses. Miguel recoiled so hard that he nearly lost his footing on the ladder. "It breathed on me," he yelped, eyes wide with panic. Dan stared up in shock. Had the figure just moved on its own? "Get down now," he barked. Miguel hastily descended a couple of steps, dragging the limp figure with him under the arms. As he clutched it, something gave way with a dry crack. The dummy's left arm broke off entirely at the shoulder, snapping like a twig. Miguel lost his grip and stumbled off the ladder. Dan caught him before he fell. The severed arm landed in Dan's hands. For a moment, Dan and Miguel stood stock still, each holding a part of the thing. Alice trained the work lamp on it, and the harsh light revealed the truth. The hanging figure's arm wasn't made of plastic or rubber at all. It was human. Desiccated brownish skin clung to bone, and where it had broken, they could see actual bone marrow and dried sinew. Miguel dropped the torso in shock. It hit the floor with a dull thud, kicking up dust. "Oh God, it's a corpse," Alice whispered, horror dawning on her face. Their minds raced. A real human body had been strung up in this funhouse for who knows how long. Dan realized it must have been preserved somehow, embalmed. "How is this even possible?" Miguel stammered, nausea rising. None of them noticed that behind them, in the darkness, something else was stirring. Miguel wiped his hands on his jeans, heart pounding. "We have to get out of here and call the police," he said, voice trembling. Dan nodded tersely. He had dealt with plenty of gruesome sights in his career, but nothing like this. Alice was already backing toward the exit when a sudden noise made them all jump. Somewhere in the darkness, the ride's old chain motor had lurched to life, rattling loudly as if a ghost train were grinding up an invisible hill. Dan spun around, sweeping his flashlight over the controls. "Who turned that on?" he yelled over the noise. Alice's eyes were wide. "I shut off the power an hour ago," she shouted back, barely audible above the clanking chain, yet the machinery chugged along on its own. Before they could react, the silence of the funhouse was further shattered by music, or something like it. A tinny Calliope melody seeped through hidden speakers, distorted and off-key, as if the cheerful carnival tune itself had decayed. The jaunty music that once accompanied the ride now sounded like a dying music box echoing from all around. Miguel's flashlight began to flicker, plunging them into intermittent darkness. In the strobing light, they realized the props around them had moved. All around them, the once static props had moved. Dozens of painted eyes and grotesque grins were now fixed on the intruders. Even the withered corpse on the floor had somehow turned its face in their direction, jaw hanging open. "Go! Go! Go!" Dan bellowed. The three bolted for the nearest service door, panic taking over. Miguel tugged at the door handle, but it rattled, stuck fast. "It's jammed!" he cried. Dan threw his shoulder against the door to no effect. Over the grinding chain and warped Calliope music, a new sound rose, a chorus of low laughter echoing from somewhere in the darkness, like a crowd of carnival-goers chuckling at a distant joke. The laughter swelled and then choked into a raspy cough, like the death rattle of something old and dust-choked. All at once, a wooden crack sounded overhead. The very gallows frame where the hanging dummy had been displayed suddenly collapsed from the ceiling. Miguel shouted as a heavy timber fell onto his leg, knocking him to the floor. He howled in pain, pinned under the weight of the splintered wood. Miguel lay groaning, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Dan rushed to heave the beam off Miguel's limb, grunting with effort as he dragged the younger man free from the debris. "We're getting out through the main entrance. Now," Dan yelled, hoisting Miguel up under the shoulders. Miguel's face was ashen with pain, but he hobbled onward, teeth gritted. Alice led the way, clinging to the beam of her flashlight. At last, the neon-painted double doors of the main entrance came into view at the end of a short corridor. Alice's relief was short-lived. One of the doors was ajar, and in the gap stood the silhouette of the hanged man. The very corpse they had cut down was now upright, blocking their escape. Alice felt her blood run cold. The figure in the doorway gave a spasmodic twitch. It was the corpse, upright and swaying. For a moment, she thought it might be alive. Miguel let out a wordless whimper. But Dan saw the truth. The corpse's limbs hung slack, its feet dragging. It was being puppeteered by some invisible force. He stepped in front of the others. In desperation, Dan shouted at the darkness to let them go. In answer, the lights overhead flickered madly. With each flash, the crowd of figures seemed to reposition, encircling. In a strobe of frozen moments, every dummy was turned toward the main doors like a silent audience. They were surrounded. His eyes fell on the corpse's slack jaw and the dangling threads of fishing line. Realization struck Dan like ice water. He understood now. The corpse had never been the source of this haunting. It was a plug, a stopper keeping something far older at bay, and they had just pulled it out. "We have to put him back," Dan rasped. With a surge of determination, he pushed Miguel and Alice behind him. Still gripping a crowbar he'd picked up earlier, Dan advanced toward the corpse in the doorway. The air around him felt thick and heavy, pressing against each step. Summoning all his courage, Dan tried to heave the body aside, intent on resealing that ghastly mouth or rehanging the figure where it belonged. "I'm sorry," he whispered, unsure if he was apologizing to the dead man or to whatever dwelled here. Suddenly, an invisible force struck Dan like a freight train. He was hurled off his feet, and the corpse's body was likewise flung aside. Dan hit the floor with a bone-rattling thud, his crowbar clanging away into the dark. Alice screamed Dan's name as he went down. From the ground, Dan watched in despair as the corpse crumpled to the floor, now nothing more than an empty sack of bones. The last vestige of life left that husk, and the presence in the room seemed to turn its attention toward the only living souls remaining. "Run!" Dan gasped, wind knocked out of him. He tried to rise, but pain held him down. Alice hovered, torn. She didn't want to leave him. Dan met her eyes, and in them she saw unmistakable urgency. Miguel, trembling and pale, tugged at her sleeve desperately. Fighting back tears, Alice nodded. She grabbed Miguel, and together they limped around the corpse and burst through the doorway, now cleared of obstruction. As they crossed the threshold, Dan summoned the last of his strength to slam the double doors shut behind them. As Alice and Miguel limped away from Laff in the dark, a final sound echoed from inside. Not quite a scream, not quite a laugh. Then the night fell eerily silent. In the aftermath, investigators confirmed that the hanging dummy was in fact a mummified human corpse nearly 65 years old, which was finally removed and given a proper burial. But the people who survived that night knew there was more to the story. To this day, locals say the old funhouse is cursed. Those brave enough to peer through its boarded-up walls swear they hear faint calliope music still playing and see shadows flitting in the dark. Whatever the Carnival Man had been holding back is free now, and it has no intention of leaving. Even today, no one knows exactly what was unleashed inside that abandoned funhouse the night they took down the Carnival Man. The corpse was buried, the ride was dismantled, but strange noises still echo along the empty pier when the wind is just right. The Carnival Man was never the ghost. He was the lock on the door.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, Make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.